On South Asia. Welcome to the podcast produced by the Department of Modern South Asian Languages and Literatures, South Asia Institute, Heidelberg.
Welcome to On South Asia. My name is Judhajit Sarkar, and today we have with us Professor Tariq Rahman. Professor Rahman is a distinguished national professor of Pakistan since 2004, an emeritus professor at the National Institute of Pakistan Studies, Islamabad. Professor Rahman is presently the Dean of the School of Education at the Beacon House National University, Lahore. He has published over 10 books, over 100 articles, and has received several prestigious awards from around the world. Professor Rahman, thanks a lot for
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me.
We'll begin with your latest book,
Yes.
which is titled Pakistan's Wars and an Alternative History. It was published by Routledge in 2022. Like all your earlier books, this book also draws on a variety of sources, including official documents, memoirs by retired army officials, interviews with a number of important personals. And this book is a kind of an exercise in both military history and political history. To begin with, could you please share with us what motivated you to write this book?
Right. The reason for this book was that I was a young officer, an army officer in 1971. And I found myself disagreeing with the policies, that time policy of the Yahya Khan government. I thought that if the people of Bangladesh want to be freed and they, without violence, they should allow that through some means. So that was it. And then there was a war, etc. And although I didn't go there, I was not sent to what was called East Pakistan then, but I decided at that time to write about it in fiction. So I wrote some short stories, etc. But that was not enough. Gradually, I thought I should write more about not just that war, but all wars. What motivates them? Then I shrank that to just wars of Pakistan, not all wars, but wars of Pakistan, all wars is not doable really. So
Right.
how the decision making is made, etc. So there was a personal reason for it. That's why I did it.
To follow up on that, in this book, of course, you don't just talk about the 1971 liberation war of Bangladesh, but you also give us a perspective on all, if not most, if not all the wars that Pakistan has fought, both against India and with against some other non-state entities as well.
Yes.
Could you briefly summarize what are the main arguments that you present in this book?
Okay, right. Thank you very much. That's a very good question. Three things. First, that these wars have been started by a clique. That means there is a way of doing things. Governments do things in a certain way. You know, there is the cabinet, etc. That's where the decision making is made. Of course, the decision making for war is secret, but nevertheless, it is made by an input of many people. Here there was a clique. Generally, this clique was of military officers. Sometimes they worked like a clique, although the head of the state was also part of this clique. Like in the 1965 war, Ayub Khan was the president. He was part of a clique of 4 people, 2 of them civilians, 2 military officers. But even the commander-in-chief of the army, General Muhammad Musa Khan, was against that war, etc. So it wasn't done, the proper decision for war wasn't taken in the manner in which governments act. Kargil, again a clique of 4 officers. Nawaz Sharif, who was the Prime Minister, was not informed, as he says. Even the first war, in which the 1947 48, in which, Mr. Jinnah was at that time the Governor General, and a powerful Governor General, and there was a Prime Minister, Liaquat Ali Khan, and yet the decision was taken to send these non-state actors, tribesmen, into Kashmir in such a way that it wasn't a government decision at all. It was hidden. It was denied. It is still denied. And it's only through sources that one knows that they acted like a clique, not like a proper legitimate government, which they were. So that is why, that's one thing. Mm-hmm. The other one is I have used what I call, as a metaphor, I use the term gambling. Gambling means taking more risk than the state can take. All wars are, of course, in a sense, they take risks, of course, all wars do. But some more than others. My view is that in Pakistan, being a smaller country, smaller economy, it is not in the interest of Pakistan itself to initiate wars for Kashmir or anything. And that's why I say that these wars have been more akin to what one would call gambling, excessive risk-taking. There's a third element, which there's not much time, so I didn't speak about it when I gave my lecture. And that is that I've used what I call, some insights from subaltern history point of view.
Right.
What I've said is that in a war, everyone is voiceless. Mm-hmm. People down below, even if they are officers' wives, etc., who are not otherwise subalterns at all, even they are voiceless. So voicelessness is something which is added, and therefore people become situational subalterns. So I have, as far as possible, I have taken that, the element of what, men suffered, hangers-on of the army, camp followers of the army, what they suffered, and what women suffered, etc., what prisoners of war suffered, all this. The two separate chapters on this. So this is the third thing which I've added. So it's not really a military history in the sense of analyzing battles. Right. It doesn't have anything to do with battles. It looks at decision-making, and it looks at people's response, it looks at how they suffered, and it looks at this, risk and voicelessness.
Right. In fact, you call the book an alternative history of Pakistan's wars. Could you say maybe a few words on why you say alternative?
Alternative, several ways. One, of course, is the conventional military history is that you talk about battles.
Right.
That's the conventional military history. So it's alternative in that sense. Secondly, in Pakistan, as well, I think, as in other countries, there's a nationalistic perspective. That narrative runs through history. Every narrative is imposed. So that the ideological imposition is already there. One has to make sense of what one's nation did. One has to, in a sense, defend it. Sometimes that is done in a subtle manner, sometimes it is done in a more direct and less subtle manner. Here, that is not the point at all. Here the point is, humanity, people, not the nation as such. Mm-hmm. If the interests of an elite which governs that nation at that time is not in the interest of the people of that country and that region, then in my view, that sort of history must be recorded. Mm-hmm. But it has to be an alternative history then, because it is not at all according to the normal narratives which historians do. In that sense also it is an alternative history.
Okay. So moving on a bit from
yes, of course.
Pakistan's wars and to your other works, especially your earlier work.
Yes.
And the book that you wrote just before Pakistan's wars was on Jihad.
Yes,
and you call it an intellectual history of Jihad in South Asia.
Yes.
Or rather the various interpretations of the notion of Jihad in South Asia.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any broad overlaps between the work you did on Jihad and your latest book on Pakistan's wars? And also, as long as we are on this subject of historiography, could you also briefly tell us how you perceive the differences between, let's say, political history and intellectual history, since you have written both?
Okay, right. Well, it is called Interpretations of Jihad in South Asia.
Right.
And basically, it's an intellectual history because it takes an a concept, an idea, which is an intellectual product, a product of the human mind, right? And it pursues that through different forms, the narratives, the sources in this case are the tafasir, that is to say, exegesis of the Holy Quran. Okay, so I've looked at the views of the different people different types of people who have written those works, and I've looked at the same verse and the different interpretations given to it. So the verse is the same, but the interpretations of it are such that one can categorize them in, let's say, three ways. One are the militants, the Islamist militants. The overlap is there. Their theories are given in this book. Their practice, what they actually did, is given in chapters in my latest book on wars. Okay, but how do they justify those actions? Suicide bombing, let's say, or some other action, or guerrilla action, etc. How do they justify it? They also bring the same sources. The interpretation is different. The second major group are those who believe that under the modern circumstances, it is peace, not war, which is the dominant interpretation of the Quran and the Hadith. So they believe that these days we have several treaties, we have entered treaties, etc. So the thing which jihad would now mean only doing good deeds, reforming yourself, because that's one of the meanings of jihad also. It would not mean fighting unless it is in self-defense. So that's the other one. These people would believe in peace. Okay. The third one is again a group of the let's say the conservative ulama, most of them. They believe that if a state is not powerful, then a state must enter into, let's say, treaties. And those treaties cannot be cancelled unless you inform the opponent beforehand, because then it would be a lie. So you have to inform the opponent beforehand, and a jihad must be declared by the head of the state, the head of a Muslim state. It is not groups which just get up from that state and start fighting. So, but it can be defensive, it can be offensive. So there are many other several positions, but these are the main positions which I have looked at in this book.
Right.
So the point is, which one leads where? If one takes the first one which I said, then it leads to this eternal conflict. If one takes the peace one, etc., then it leads to the international order being for everybody and being a peaceful order. And if one takes the position of the ulama, then it would lead to the thing which has always been happening in international relations, that when states have been powerful, they have found ways to fight, and when the states are not powerful, they have found ways to have peace, etc.
Thank you for that answer. Now we'll go into a slightly different direction, and I have a longish question, so I would request you to bear with me. If one looks at your admittedly long list of publications, one cannot but notice your abiding interest in language and topics related to sociolinguistics. You have written extensively about language ideology, language policies, the role of language in education and culture in the shaping of identities, and so on. And one of your most widely read and admired book is From Hindi to Urdu, A Social and Political History, which gives us a long the way perspective on the shared history of the two languages we today call Hindi and Urdu. And you have shown how language politics impinged upon the bifurcation of these two languages and the literary cultures that were nestled in them. And I would also admit that this is the first book that was my introduction to your works. So I have two questions here. One is about your interest in this field itself, when it started and how. And the second question is more specifically about your standpoint vis-a-vis the historical relationship between Hindi and Urdu, and if one also may bring in Hindustani into the whole picture. Has your standpoint about this relationship changed over the years, the way you conceived it when you were writing from Hindi to Urdu, which was in 2011? And now looking back, do you see your standpoint having undergone some modification, some mutation?
Judhajit, this is the first time your question is making me afraid because you know a lot about it. And I'm sure, since I've left it a long time back, I'm sure I'm going to make some blunder. But nevertheless, let's begin. Good to learn from you. And you see how my interest in language began. Well, it began because long time back, in 1988, actually, I found that there had been several language movements, Bengali language movement, etc. But there wasn't a history of those in Pakistan. I knew there were histories from India. You know, Gupta Sahib had written one, Jitendra Das Gupta, I think. Yes, Das Gupta. Okay, so, but there's nothing from Pakistan. Bangladesh, yes, there were accounts. So I started writing my first history of those things. This is called Language and Politics in Pakistan. Then, of course, I wrote other books of the same kind, language learning among the Muslims of North India and Pakistan. I taught myself the Devanagari script, so I learned, then it came to my mind that one should write the history of actually Hindi Urdu. Mm-hmm. And that is why it's called from Hindi to Urdu, because this language for something like 500 years was called Hindi, Hindvi, Hindui, and so on. The name Urdu only came in the 18th century. So, it was the property of the Ganga Jamuna civilization, both Hindus and Muslims. And yes, Persian was used in official sources, etc. But people spoke, and normally in the cities, Hindus and Muslims both spoke this language. Some had more Persian words in them if they were connected with the Darbar of the kings, etc. Some had less, but it varied. And those kind of registers keep varying in every language. Mm-hmm. You know, in a scientific work in English, there would be more Latin and Greek. But if you were speaking to ordinary people, there would be more Germanic words in English. So those things happened, those words. There wasn't this antagonism and separation. This started from the 1750s. And it started with the work of the Muslim, at that time, mostly the poets, elite, mm-hmm. who were losing power. And were terribly scared, actually, because they were losing power. The Persians were looking down upon them because the Persians said, well, your language, what you speak and what you write is not Persian. It's different from ours and inferior to ours, etc. You are clones. And they were afraid of, far away were the British, etc. I mean, they had not actually, at that time, the cultural domination of English wasn't there. It wasn't very far away. But they wanted an identity for themselves. So they started...
talking about the late 18th century.
Late 18th century, middle of the 18th century. They started Persianizing Urdu. They wanted to make it not exactly Persian, but some distinctive class marker, an identity marker. When they did that, they removed words of Hindi origin. They removed words of local origin, bhasha, as they used to call it. Actually, I've seen lists of those words, 4,000. I saw that list and I've referred to it. So they removed some beautiful words like Nana and Sagar and things like that, etc. They were kept in songs, all right, but they were removed from the upper class elite literature, ghazal, for instance, and prose writing, etc. So that happened. From 1800 onwards, there were corresponding movement among Hindus, and this was in Calcutta, etc. And this was to remove Persian and Arabic words from the same language, and of course to write it in the Devanagari script, And so this movement, 1803 onwards, etc., that also got on. This was also an identity movement. This was a sort of, I would call it a decolonization of the mind. And in the sense that for them, this was a removal of the ascendancy of Muslim culture over, because you see, the British policy was, unfortunately I would say, it was to use Urdu in courts. They called it Hindustani all right, but they actually used in the Urdu script. They called it, and this happened right till 1949, right? 1949. So they used Urdu in the courts, they used Urdu in the Thana Kachari, etc. The Hindus were much more in number. They allowed that if a letter was sent to the government in Hindi, then it would be answered in Hindi. So that was done, which affected jobs, Muslim jobs as well as the caste class jobs. Because you see, if somebody is writing in English, a clerk, then there is another clerk to see it. If this clerk is absent, then there's a head clerk to monitor the whole thing. That means 3 jobs gone. And the budget is not going to be increased. So who's going to suffer? Either the Munshiji or the Munshiji is either a Premchand kind of Munshiji, caste class, or else a Muslim Munshiji. And instead of that, someone knowing Hindi is going to be there. That's why there was all this protest against it. So the Muslim protest was not really a protest against Hindi as such, but to save their jobs. Okay, so that sort of thing happened, and both these movements led to this house divided. This is the title of someone who was preceded. Now it became a race for identity on both sides. So in India, after 1947, and in Pakistan, in both, the point is, whether it is understood or not, intelligibility is not the point. The point is identity. So a word from Sanskrit is added in India. If nobody understands it, doesn't matter. A minister of state is going to speak on it. Whether you understand it or not is nobody's business. Right. In Pakistan, hararat paima is going to be used, thermometer, or everybody is going to call it thermometer otherwise. But hararat paima is going to be used, etc. Source has to be Arabic or Persian, whether you understand it or not. So this race between the two, identity race, etc., antagonism, this race, instead of bringing people close, etc., this has actually linguistically tried to separate them. But there are things will remain which actually defy all this. Those are films, Bollywood films. I know they've started changing, but nevertheless, they're still like that. Dramas, Pakistan TV drama, everybody watches it in India. And then this new thing which has come, SMS, social media, etc. Right. Although this is more English-based. So this is not the Urdu Hindi based, this is more English based, because the people who are doing it in the diaspora as well as in India as well as in Pakistan know English pretty well. So this is more, but still there are words of that time. The connection with Urdu Hindi is there, but it is more English based. So that is certainly there. But Pakistanis and Indians get by through phrases of both Urdu Hindi and English, and they understand prem, they understand love, and they also understand mohabbat and ishq. This is all over North India. Of course, India has many other languages. So has Pakistan, Pashto as well as there, Sindhi is also there, etc. I'm talking only about Urdu. So while the states have been trying to separate, there are factors which have not totally separated the two in the ordinary spoken sense. Yes.
The audience by now would have understood that you are a prolific writer, and every 2-3 years we get a significant contribution from you in various different fields. So far we have talked about your contributions in the field of political history, of intellectual history, and now also the history of language and language ideologies. Unfortunately, our time is short, so we'll not be able to discuss or touch upon some of your other works, although we would have loved to. But before I let you go, I would request you to to tell us a bit about your upcoming book, which is a critical commentary on Mirza Asadullah Khan Ghalib's poetry.
Okay.
To just give you a pointer, the most obvious question that anybody who is familiar with Urdu literature will ask you is, of course, why another book on Ghalib?
Why a commentary on Ghalib if there are over 60 commentaries in Urdu and at least 3 in English? Why? Okay, fine. Well, to make it short, yes, there are commentaries, even more than 60 in Urdu on Ghalib, but they're on Urdu. They cannot be read by people who know. I want to introduce Ghalib to people like myself who were taught in English medium schools, wanted to know about Ghalib. Ghalib is world heritage actually, and therefore, but couldn't understand the words and obviously did not know how to read those things in very good Urdu. But they didn't know how to read it. So it is for this reason. Now you will say that Francis Pritchard has written an excellent work and that is available to anybody. Yes, that is true. But with all respect for Francis Pritchard, who is a great scholar, that work is actually meant for scholars of Urdu. The main idea is not to relate Ghalib to the concerns of the 21st century, but to show the play of idiom and metaphor and irony and things of that kind. Secondly, one feels, and this Frances Pritchard has written herself, and hats off to her, she has written that she showed one of her explanations to Shamsur Rahman Farooqi, who is, I think, Urdu's greatest scholar, and he said that your translation, your explanation is too shokh. She uses this word herself. In other words, what she had done was, in that she had chosen a meaning which is not ordinarily chosen, remote meaning, rather than a familiar meaning. And according to Shamsur Rahman Farooqi, she had twisted the meaning of that couplet to fit into her own point of view, explanation. So that's, in some sense, it is not the kind of explanation which a beginner will profit by. That's for something like yourself, someone who is writing on Urdu, someone who is doing his PhD, etc., in Urdu, etc., those kind of people. And someone who know the Urdu tradition very well, someone like yourself. But my book is not for those kind of people. It's not limited to those kind of people. It is for people who don't know Urdu very well, necessarily, but still want to understand Ghalib. Now, Niazi's commentary is there, but that's too short. I mean, there are 3-4 lines and that is it. And Niazi does not refer to any previous work, whereas I do. So I thought there is still a gap, and this is filling that gap. I hope it is people like you read it and then decide what you think about it. But that was my intention.
We will eagerly wait
for the
publication of this book. Professor Rahman, it was a pleasure talking to you, and I hope that we'll get the opportunity to talk about your other publications, which multiple of them you have in mind. You are planning to finish writing a few of them in the next few years, and we hope that we'll get the chance to talk to you about those publications as and when they come out. But for the time being, let me express our heartfelt thanks for talking to us today. This was Judhajit Sarkar on behalf of the Department of Modern South Asian Languages and Literatures at Edinburgh University.
You've listened to an episode of On South Asia, a podcast by the Department of Modern South Asian Languages and Literatures, South Asia Institute, Heidelberg. Have a look at our other episodes as well. For topic wishes and feedback, don't hesitate to reach out. You can find our email in the description.